Hey, Rube.
Hey, Dave, how's it in Indiana?
It's actually warm. The warmest I've ever experienced a combine, and I don't know how to feel about it, but I'm pretty happy.
It's usually like either sleeting or snowing or like pouring or minus 12 degrees or a combination of all those things.
Yeah. None of the above this time. I'll take it.
Maybe you can stay in a few extra days, make a vacation out of it.
Yeah, maybe not. This is the Eagle Eye Podcast presented by Nissan. He's Reuben Frank. I'm Dave Zangaro. We have a ton to talk about today. Some news came down as I'm out here at the Combine in Indianapolis. Coordinators. We know who the Eagles coordinators are officially this time, and some other staff changes that we'll get into. Howie Roseman and Nick Sirianni both spoke at the Combine on Tuesday afternoon, so we'll break down some of that. And then I have some other takeaways from being out here the first full day in Indianapolis. But Rube, let's start with one of the two coordinator hires. This is the one we weren't quite as sure of. We knew Brian Johnson was going to be the offensive coordinator, but defensive coordinator, the Eagles hire Sean Desai, who was in Seattle last year, had 9 years in Chicago, former assistant under Al Golden at Temple. Yeah. What do you make of the move?
Yeah, he's a really interesting guy. His background is kind of unique. He was going to school and getting his master's at Temple while he was coaching, and then I think he got his doctorate at Columbia in education while he was coaching. And just a fascinating guy, the first Indian coordinator in NFL history. So interesting guy, very smart, brilliant guy. As far as it's hard to tell exactly who he is as a coach, just because. He's only been a coordinator 1 year, and then he was assistant head coach 1 year, this past year in Seattle. But you kind of can tell from the people he's been around and, from what Nick said about him. I mean, and I think it's interesting. One thing we've learned, I think, over these last few weeks is this Nick has a very clear idea of what he wants in a defense. Like, he's not an offensive coach who's just like, all right, you're the D coordinator, you do your thing. And I think there's certain concepts that he wants the coordinator to believe in and practice, and I think Gannon did those, and Sean Desai does those, and so that I thought that was because that's not always the case, and we're an offensive coach, and sometimes it's a good thing if he doesn't, just give the guy autonomy. But Nick certainly seems to have some clear ideas about that, and. I think I really just assumed it was going to be an internal promotion for Denard Wilson. It seems like Sean Desai really blew him away in the interview, in both interviews. I'm not sure where Denard ended up ranking in that hierarchy. I don't know if it's fair to think it didn't go well for him, but Sean Desai certainly blew them away. I think it kind of feels like. Denard was the early leader in this, but that might have just been our perception and not the reality. It kind of sounds like Nick didn't feel like he was ready. He was asked about Denard, and he talked about Sean's experience. Maybe I'm making too much of that, but I think it's a curious dynamic because the players really like, especially the D-backs, really like Denard, and players always want continuity. They always want. Look, this guy knows me. He knows what I can do. We speak the same language. Now you're bringing an outside guy, and it can be a little tricky. I don't think there'll be any issues, but it is different when you hire from outside a guy these guys don't know. But you know what? Anybody who can get 18 sacks out of Robert Quinn has got to be an elite coach in my book.
Yeah, I think that was a different version of maybe it's more likely Robert Quinn returns now. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a lock. 4 years, $55 million.
Yeah, I think it became pretty clear that Desai was one of the finalists, and he was one of the most intriguing candidates for a lot of those reasons you mentioned. I mean, we kind of know what Nick wants in a defense, and the Vic Fangio scheme is part of it. And we saw a lot of those concepts with JG last year, and I don't think there's any secret that a lot of those are going to carry over into this season. And, whereas, Gannon kind of brought along some of those Fangio concepts. They had Vic in camp, and they clearly tried to put that in there. I mean, Desai's background is with Vic in Chicago. So he has an even better understanding of those things. And I think he's going to be a different coach than Gannon. I think it's unfair to just think, yeah, they liked what Gannon did. They brought in another coach to do what Gannon did. I don't think that's the case. I mean, I think a lot of those staples will be there, but Desai's also a different coach. Kind of a fascinating guy. I like that you brought up the Denard Wilson thing because Nick Sirianni said he wasn't sure if Denard will be back as defensive backs coach. Yeah, I think that it's tough to tell right now. It's so fresh with Desai that the agreement got finalized just before Howie Roseman went to the podium. So, I mean, it's coming down late, but you wonder about that dynamic because his players aren't just like pushing for him. They were vocal about wanting him. And I think Denard is mature enough that it wouldn't be an issue, but it's something they have to think about. And Desai might have his own guys he wants to bring in.
Yeah, that's true. And I mean, look, they don't have a ton of defensive coaches under contract. I think there's only 5. So, you know, we'll see how it goes there. But it's really for a guy that has only been a coordinator 1 year. It's a little tricky just trying to figure out exactly who he is as a coach. And I think it's going to be a little unfair. Maybe there's going to be a lot of comparisons between his first year and Gannon's second year. They're not going to have the same talent. I mean, we don't know exactly who's going to be here, but we do know that there's no way Hargrave, Bradbury, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, you know, they're just not all going to be here. Maybe one of those guys, I can't see 2 of those guys being here. Those are key guys in this group, not to mention, you know, BG and Fletch and TJ and Kazir. And I mean, there's just so many changes coming on this defense. So kind of like Gannon's first year, you know, you can see him getting better as the year went on, but he didn't have a lot to work with. I think Desai probably have a little more. We don't really know who's going to be here, but you know, certainly 2 of his big priorities are going to be Jordan Davis and Kobe Dean, and getting them to be every down or at least everyday players, regular starting caliber guys, not 15 snap guys or 0 snap guys in Kobe's case. So that's a big challenge. I mean, that's going to be the reality of this defense next year. Those kind of guys, Milton Williams, are all going to have to make a big step. So Sean Desai is kind of that's like priority number 1 for him, is getting the most out of some of these young guys. And there's other ones too. I mean, whether it's Zach McPherson, we don't know, but there's going to be a group of them.
Yeah, and I mean, likely some draft picks are going to have to play too. And you're right. It's going to be unfair if people start comparing the Gannon defense to whatever Desai has, because the talent level won't be there. But I think we'll see pretty quickly what kind of a coach he is and if he's getting the most out of these young players, because that's really where, not to say it's not important when you have all this talent, but I think it shows up a little bit more when you have younger players that you're trying. It's a different, like a way of coaching. It's a different element of it, but it matters. And it matters how he brings along these young players, and he's going to have a ton of them this year.
Well, you think about it, like how many older guys on this defense are under contract other than Slay? I mean, you know, there's not a lot of those guys in that 30, you know, in that 30 to 33 age group. There's just the guys that are under contract. Now, that's not to say a couple might come back, but yeah, it's a really young group, and it's a different job. It's going to be a different job than Gannon had this past year.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. Now, like I think people are wondering, what's it going to look like? You know, is it going to be more aggressive? I don't know. I don't think it's going to be more aggressive in the way some people are thinking, like blitz rate. I don't think that's going to spike. But it might need to go up a little bit if the front isn't as dynamic as it was this year. I mean, now at least they have Reddick and Sweat coming back. That'll help. But the middle of the defense could potentially lose Fletcher Cox and Javon Hargrave. I mean, that would be, you're talking about a ton of pressure leaving. And then, you know, if you're not getting the pressure with your front, then that's when you need to incorporate more blitzing. So it could end up like they could end up blitzing more next season, but it's not necessarily indicative of Desai's philosophies.
Yeah, listen to this, Dave. I just ran this here. The only guys over 26, the only defensive players over 26 who are signed for next year are Reddick, Slay, and Well, Avante's 26. That's it. Sue's
Sweat
up.
isn't 26?
What's that?
Sweat isn't 26?
He's still 25.
Wow.
He
Okay.
turns 26 soon, but over 20. I'm saying over 26.
Yeah.
Like Andre Sacheret's 26, Barnett's 26, but the only guys over 26 who are under contract are Reddick and Slay, and that's a young defense. That might be a story worth writing, but yeah, it's interesting, and hey, he's got a doctorate in education, so I guess he's gonna have to be doing a lot of teaching here.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that element of like the teaching part of coaching, which sounds obvious, but that's something that Nick really cares about. He's always said, if he wasn't a coach, he'd probably be a teacher. It's an element of coaching he really appreciates. So I'm sure that background with Desai spoke to him. And you're right. I think he really did kind of blow them away in the interview. It was an exhaustive interview process. And I give them credit for that because they kind of probably felt like they were up against the gun a little bit, getting a late start, losing Gannon so late. And then they interviewed a bunch of guys with varying backgrounds and varying philosophies. And they were all, 4 or 5 hour interviews. So it was, and we know how the Eagles operate. It's always a chance for them to learn from other coaches and then maybe one day implement it or just gain knowledge. And I think that's the way they use a lot of these. Like you have Vance Joseph in front of you. You talk to him about blitz rate, right? Or you talk to him about blitz philosophy. And I think that's what they used it for. And it's kind of the same process they go through when they hire a head coach, but maybe a little smaller scale with this one, but that's what they went through.
Yeah, and it's something that Nick clearly takes very seriously, building a staff, and he seems to be very good at it. Kind of reminds you of the early days of Big Red, and even Chip. I mean, Chip built a hell of a staff. I mean, that was the least of his problems.
Lasted longer than him.
Yeah, most of them did. Heck, one of them just got promoted today, TJ Paganetti.
Yeah.
A Chip Kelly hire who's the senior offensive assistant, I think, something like that. But yeah, I think it's, and look, they're going to lose Brian Johnson. I mean, most likely. I mean, I know he just got hired today, but he's not going to be here for like, there's going to be like a Rod Dowhower. He's going to be here, for as long as, I mean, he's going to be a head coach. I'll be surprised if he's not in 2025,
Yeah, you're probably right. But that's early. We're getting a little ahead of ourselves.
A little bit. But, Nick has talked about how important it is to replenish the lower level, like the guys we never talk about, like the Alex Tannys and the TJ Paganettis and the Joe Caspers, and just keeping the pipeline going and that's what Andy was really good at, or he's better at it now. I mean, just those low level guys, the quality control guys, they become position coaches, they become coordinators, and then they become coveted head coaches. And, I don't think building a staff was Doug's favorite thing. I think play calling was, but Nick seems to really take it really seriously. And obviously it didn't cost Doug, but he won a Super Bowl with big chunk of Chip Kelly's coaches, but yeah. But I like the move from the standpoint of there's nothing in Sean Desai's background that tells you he's not going to be a really good coach. So we'll see. You never know, but and I don't think it's fair to look at the Bears ranking. He was a coordinator 1 year. They had okay talent. I think you really need to see a guy for 3 years, at least a couple years, to really have a sense of who he is.
Yeah, you're right. It wasn't Doug's favorite thing. Nick seems to take pride in it, and it's not just having a good staff; it's getting these guys new jobs. I think he is really proud of it, as much as it hurts him to lose Shane Steichen and Jonathan Gannon. Like I think he takes pride in getting those guys ready, and not just getting them the jobs, but like he feels like he got them prepared for those jobs. Like he incorporates them in decision making, and he explains his process. And it's really what Frank Reich did for him. He wants to pass that on. And I think these two guys, having been through it, are going to do the same things in Indianapolis and Arizona. And I think it breeds a really good environment, because if a coach, a lower level coach, feels like you have their best interest at heart, they're going to work harder and they're going to strive to do their best job because they see the payoff. And um, that's, you mentioned Alex Tanney, like that's part of the Brian Johnson promotion, is having a guy you feel comfortable take on what's a very important role as the quarterback's coach.
Yeah. Something Nick said, I think it was today, it's kind of a blur, but he talked about, he said, helping these guys get prepared isn't something you do where like Shane Steichen's like, look, I have an interview with the Colts, help me prepare. He said, it's something that I've been doing for 2 years with Shane. Like, what would you do here? What would you do here? Think about this situation. This could come up if you're a head coach. Think about that. And he said it's an ongoing process that's been, that started when he got here. And, there's certain guys that are on a certain track to be head coaches possibly. And he meets with those guys. And I don't think he's excluding anyone, but I think there's some guys who maybe aren't ready for that yet. There's other guys like Tracy Rocker and Jeff Stoutland who are kind of veteran lifer position coaches. And it's just understood that that's who they are at this point. And there doesn't mean they're not great coaches or good coaches. Stoutland's, peerless, but he's also in his mid 60s. So I think Nick really serves those guys well. You're right.
Yeah. Brian Johnson officially promoted on Tuesday, the worst kept secret in the NFL. They were going to lose him most likely if they didn't promote him. And the timing luckily worked out. I mean, that would have been a disaster if the Eagles lost Shane Steichen after already losing Brian Johnson. So they're lucky in some sense that this worked out for them to keep Brian. I think a lot of times, like, everyone looks at Brian Johnson and thinks connection with Jalen Hurts, that's why he's the offensive coordinator. And that's a big part of it. But I also think his resume is impressive enough, like even without that long-standing relationship with Jalen, like you look at what he's done in his very young career, it's impressive.
Yeah, it really is. And he has background calling plays at Utah, at Mississippi State. He did some of it at Florida. Coached Dak Prescott as a collegian. And yeah, I think that's a really good point. It's not just about, look, that's an important thing. And to have your quarterback trust his offensive coordinator is huge. But I think the play calling aspect is just as big, especially because Nick made it clear from day one, I ain't calling the plays anymore. It's not part of my job right now. And even before we knew Brian, I guess we knew at that point he was likely to get the job. But I think he has a lot going for him. And the few times we've spoken to him, and there haven't been a lot, there will be more, obviously, but just a really sharp guy. And he's just one of those guys who just kind of has head coach written all over him, and I don't want to get ahead of myself, but he just, the way he carries himself, the way he speaks, the way players respect him. What?
You said, I don't want to get ahead of myself. And you already brought up twice that he'll probably be a head coach on the day he got promoted.
Certain guys, and I've said this, there's certain guys I've covered I knew would be head coaches. And I think it was John Harbaugh, Jeff Fisher, as low-level coaches, you could just kind of tell. And Matt Nagy was one of those, actually. There was just something, look, I didn't say he was going to be a great head coach. Yeah, it was pretty good to get to the playoffs that one year. As we know, almost beat the Eagles. But there's certain guys I can't even maybe articulate it too well, but they have the look, they have the personality, they have the mentality, they have the respect of the players. And I think Brian Johnson fits right in there. And, I think this is still Nick Sirianni's offense. But I'm really curious to see what spin Brian Johnson puts on it, and where the running game fits in for him. Now, some of this will have to do with personnel, but generally, quarterbacks coaches are going to throw. They just like to throw. They're quarterbacks coaches, so be interesting to see where the run game fits in with his philosophy as well. Yeah,
I mean, Shane was a former quarterback.
Yeah, he was.
Quarterback coach, so he found a good balance. I think this is where the Jalen Hurts connection really, to me, plays a role, because I think it's imperative that you're play caller has a really good understanding of the quarterback, and Shane had that. But certainly Brian Johnson has that probably to an even larger extent. So I'm looking forward to seeing what it looks like with him calling the plays for Jalen. And that's really, to me, where the relationship part of it becomes huge. And I'm excited to see what the passing game, especially the passing game, but, all the offense, but especially the passing game looks like with him calling the plays.
Yeah, I think Jalen and Shane were really on the same page, but this is a guy who's known Jalen since he was 3. Well, I mean, I can just see 6-year-old Jalen telling Brian Johnson, if you're ever my coach, don't call this. I don't like throwing that pass. I don't like throwing that route. I think they're really in lockstep, and when you're around someone that much and you have that much respect for each other and you've worked together, I just think there's such a symbiotic relationship. It's almost like one brain, and that's a real advantage when you have that.
Yeah, it is. I'm excited to watch the offense with him. I really am. And I agree with you. I was making fun of you, but I do agree with you that I think he's got head coach written all over him, and they're probably just renting him for a while.
Yeah. It just seems that way. But by then, Alex Tanner will be ready, and somebody else will move up. Maybe it'll be TJ Paganetti. Who knows? At Nissan, we just made your choice for a new car, an easier one than ever, with our most exciting and fuel-efficient lineup. The choice is yours. Now get great offers across our full line. Shop your local Nissan store today at nissanusa.com.
Catch all the sports action and more at Rivers Casino Philadelphia. Whether it's the money line or the pass line, there's something for everyone in the great sports book. Rivers Casino Philadelphia. Philly loves a winner. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Opioid addiction is a national public health crisis. The Someone You Know podcast from the Independence Blue Cross Foundation offers inspiring stories that challenge stigma, offer hope, and humanize the disease of addiction. Download the new Season 3 of Someone You Know on all major podcast platforms. All right, Rube, we had a chance to talk to Howie on Tuesday, and to me the most fascinating thing we spoke with him about was upcoming free agency, and we talked about it a bunch. Like there's so many of these guys, and they're not going to be able to keep them all, and honestly, they'll probably be able to keep just a handful of them.
Yeah, and but I also think that's okay. I mean, there's like how many irreplaceable guys are on that list? I don't shouldn't say irreplaceable, but like elite level guys. I mean, it's really Hargrave at this point, Hargrave, Bradbury, and Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. Not to take anything away from BG at this point, or Fletch even. They're older guys at the end of their career. They're, I think still good players. But you can get by. They'll be okay. I love BG. I hate to see him leave, and he might be back. But as far as guys, that you look at the whole list, and like life goes on without Kaiser White. Life goes on without Robert Quinn. Life goes on without Dillard and Sayamalo and Boston Scott and Pascal and even Miles and Tyree Jackson and Gardner Mitch. So it's not like there's 18 guys I have to resign. So out of that group of 3, Hargrave, Bradbury, and Chauncey, I don't think there's any chance they sign Bradbury. I think there's a pretty good chance they sign Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, but certainly not a lock. And I think Hargrave I'd put in the same category. I don't think they'll sign both. But Howie's got to prioritize out of those 2. They're both going to make a ton of money. And how to structure it, does a player agree to that structure without really hurting your future salary cap figures? Look, they're going to lose players, but it's not like the cupboard's bare, I guess is what I'm saying. And I think a guy like TJ, he can probably sign. He can probably get that done. So if you get TJ and Chauncey done, and I think Kelsey's a separate category because he'll either be here or retire. He's not like you're bidding against anyone. It's just kind of finding the number that's fair. Which is going to be a big number. But I guess what I'm saying is I think they'll be okay. It's a matter of prioritizing and then trying to get Jalen done and then work around that. There's going to be some money left to sign a couple of these guys.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's like you look at those players individually and you think, yeah, sure, they can. It's not like those guys are replaceable, but I think the volume makes it tough when you're talking about like so many new pieces coming in and relying on younger players, which is a gamble. Not to say that relying on aging veterans isn't a gamble, because there's like a decline in level of play often, but really relying on a bunch of first and second year players can be a little dangerous. So
Yeah.
I think that's the fear. I thought one of the more fascinating things Howie revealed in this press conference is the reason there weren't extensions during the season. Now, my theory on this was they don't want to do anything until the Jalen deal is done, so they have that framework to really understand what they're left with in terms of money and cap space. But that's not what he said. He said the reason they didn't do it was because they felt like they had a really strong thing going in the locker room, and they didn't want to mess it all up by picking out a guy here, a guy there, and extending them. They're worried about the locker room dynamic. That's pretty fascinating.
It really was. That really kind of jumped out at me. That's kind of Howie being GM/psychologist and really understanding. And look, I think there's something to be said for this is a team that's had success. He's been around championship locker rooms. He's been around playoff locker rooms. He talks to everybody, to players, to coaches. He understands if you don't have a contract for next year and a guy at your position gets a big money extension or a medium money extension and you don't, that can be an issue. And maybe it shouldn't be, but these guys are human beings and they don't get a lot of contracts and they're trying to maximize their value. And if you have that championship dynamic or Super Bowl dynamic, I mean, they were 8-0 and you're like, why don't they sign anybody? But if they had signed, say, Kaiser, not TJ. And look, TJ's a pro. I can't imagine, but just the dynamic is just not the same once you start doing that. Once there's that, those inequities, and they're going to be those inequities all the time. Like Cam Jurgens made more this year than Jalen Hurts. So that's just the nature of, of contracts, and each year how they go up. But you can really create some division, might be a little strong, but just some uneasiness. Why mess with that? And how we said, it might have cost us down the road. I mean, because look, there's only a limited amount of time that they have exclusive negotiating rights with these guys. And the closer you get to free agency, the less likely a guy is to sign back with his own team. You can sniff free agency at this point. So they might lose a guy because of that, but they felt like they had a really special balance in that locker room and chemistry. I forget the word he used, just that dynamic, that locker room dynamic. It's a really delicate thing. And something like an extension for one guy can really, really upset that. And that's really advanced thinking by him and his staff. And I'm sure Nick had a part in that. I'll bet Mr. Lurie did too. Jeff Lurie. People call him Mr. Lurie. That seems like something that he would, that's like he's into that holistic thinking, just like looking at the franchise as one and how everything affects everything else. I'd really like to get to the bottom of whose concept that was, whose notion that was. I think it's brilliant, really.
Reading between the lines, I think it might have had something to do with CJ Gardner-Johnson. If you trade for a guy right before the season and he's the one to get the extension.
Yeah.
I think that's like the ultimate case. And I think he would have been like one of the more likely ones to get extended. So I look at that scenario and think that might have been it. Like you want to extend CJ, but if you do that, TJ Edwards is like, I've been here. I worked my way up. I was undrafted. I didn't have a role. I've been here all these years. I fought to get to this.
Well, on the depth chart.
Yeah. And I then this guy gets brought in and he gets an extension right away. Like, yeah, I think that's probably like the best example of their thinking. And they didn't say this, but that's kind of me reading between the lines a little bit. And I think that would be the scenario where, yeah, that could be a problem.
Yeah. But if, it gave them a chance to win a championship, it was worth it.
Yeah. Didn't get it done.
But had a chance.
Didn't get it done. And we had a chance to talk to Jonathan Gannon about the Super Bowl for the first time
Mr. Segway strikes again.
They don't work as well when you point them out, but it was a good segue. We wanted to talk to him because, look, he's a head coach now, and a couple weeks have gone by, but it was a pretty big game, and the defense wasn't very good in the second half. So he was finally asked about it. He took some blame, didn't get into too many specifics, and then he was pretty clearly over talking about it, which bothered me a little bit, honestly. Like, I like Jonathan Gannon. I have a lot of respect for him. I didn't really like that. You lost the Super Bowl, and a few questions in a press conference a couple weeks later, and your first chance to really answer for it shouldn't bother you that much. And he clearly didn't want to talk about it.
Yeah, on the one hand, you could see, like, I've moved on. I'm with a different team now, but I think, and look, he's not the one that decided he wasn't going to talk after the game. He might not have anyway, but it's a team policy. It's a PR policy. Jim Schwartz didn't talk after the Super Bowl in 2017. I think the last coordinators that talked were Billy Davis. Always talked after games, right? And Pat Shurmur did, if anyone wanted to talk to him. But it's just a PR policy, which I disagree with. Now, he might not have talked anyway after the Super Bowl. I don't know. But, that's fair. I think it's something that the way it ended was just and look, Michael Clay hasn't talked either, and certainly has things to answer for, and so does Shane. But the way that game ended with those 2 touchdowns, you would like to see him be accountable. Yeah,
I mean, not that it's not going to change anything, obviously, but yeah, it's and I thought it was a chance. He admitted some fault. He said, he didn't put him in their best position. There were a few calls he would want back. But he's gone now, and he brought Nick Rallis with him. It was interesting. He was asked about, Jonathan Gannon was asked about Nick Sirianni and him and how they agreed on the process for Gannon to build his staff, because he obviously took Rallis with him. And Gannon admitted he made a mistake, and he wouldn't say what the mistake was, but I'm assuming it had something to do with the only coach he brought from this staff. What did you make of that?
Well, I wasn't able to hear it. I just heard, because the Cards website didn't stream his interview. But it was odd. It struck me as odd when you told me what he said. So yeah. I'm not sure what to make of it.
Yeah, me neither. But Nick very clearly wanted to keep his staff in place. And you look at it and it's like, okay, Shane hasn't taken any coaches. Jonathan Gannon only took one.
They must have had to give Brian Johnson a whole lot of money to stay.
What do you mean?
Well, I just think I think they probably had to match some offers.
Sure. Yeah.
He might be making more than Nick.
I doubt that, but you're right. They probably had to. But this is also a really attractive offensive coordinator job.
Yeah.
Where are you going to get a better job than? So you just watched your predecessor get a head coaching gig. You have a young quarterback who they're about to sign to a mega deal, and he's a kid you've known since he was a toddler, and you get to call the plays. So, I mean, it's a pretty attractive job for Brian too.
Yeah, and you're in Philly, and you get to hang out with the Eagle Eye podcast guys on Tuesday.
I'm sure that was at the top of his list. Remember when Vinny Curry re-signed with the Eagles once, and we asked him why he came back, and he said, "Well, I know you guys." Like, Vinny, that's not a very good reason to come back here.
Yeah, Vinny he liked hanging out with us.
He did.
I miss Vinny. Good guy.
Any other takeaways from Nick or Howie?
No, I think we kind of covered most of it. I think we did. I'm so curious how it's going to go with this Jalen contract, because there's so much that's riding on it. So there's real urgency to get it done, but it's also such a these contracts. I remember I think Fletcher Smith was Donovan's agent when Donovan got his first big giant extension. And we did the presser at in a conference room in one of the dorms at Lehigh, and Fletcher comes in with a copy of the contract, like bound. It was like, 100 pages. And I tried to steal it, but wouldn't let me. But I just remember him talking about how complex these deals are when you're talking about figuring out, how just all the bonuses and all the base salaries. And I mean, it's just so much goes into it. I mean, like undrafted rookie, like Reed Blankenship's contract's probably one page. You're making minimum wage and we're going to give you $5,000. Like, and that's it. You sign a quarterback to a, $275 million contract. Then, so I think just that it just takes time. And I'm sure Howie's been working on it. I'm sure he's got different versions of it in his office or on his laptop and, kind of working through that. But it's tricky because like you might be able to sign Boston Scott before you get Jalen done. You might be able to sign Tyree Jackson if you want, but these big ticket guys, until you know the structure of that deal and exactly how much cap space it's going to take up year to year, you're really kind of hamstrung. So you don't want to rush it. And you don't want to give them too much, but you need to get it done at some point.
Yeah, and look, I think they have the general framework in mind, even if it's not finalized. I think they kind of know what it's going to look like. But I agree with you. Like there is an incentive to hurry up and finish it. And look, I also think, there are two other contracts that are coming down in the quarterback world with Justin Herbert and Joe Burrow. And that's not the biggest reason why you feel the pressure to get it done. But I think that probably factors in at least a little bit.
You would think so. Yeah.
And try to beat them to the deal because those guys are going to get paid too, like big contracts. And that's probably, whichever contract comes in first, that's probably the starting point for the next one. That's just the way.
So why would any of them get their deal done? I guess to get
eventually someone's got to get it done. Yeah.
It's going to be an interesting offseason. Already is.
Speaking of Jalen, I did have a chance to ask Big Red about Jalen because he was so complimentary of him in the lead up to the Super Bowl. And then Jalen obviously had this incredible game. So I asked him about it and I found this interesting. So in Kansas City last Saturday was the 101 awards and Jalen won an award for the NFC Offensive Player of the Year. And he was there and he accepted the award with Brian Johnson, who we knew was going to be his offensive coordinator. But I was kind of impressed that Jalen was even there for it. Yeah, and he gave a speech and he said how much of an honor it was. But he went to the city of the team that beat him in the Super Bowl, and they're winning all kinds of awards. Like the best team went to the Chiefs, obviously. So I was impressed by that. Just not that it was surprising, but to see the poise to go up there and be so gracious. It had to be difficult. Like there's no way it wasn't tough, but he was very impressive. And Andy Reid said he got to spend some time with them and really appreciated that.
Yeah. Yeah. There's something Andy said Super Bowl week that really struck with me talking about Jalen. Excuse me. He said, he talked about how much he's improved. And he said, that's not going to stop. He says, that's the way it is with that position. And he said it just very few words. He didn't expound on it, but it's kind of a scary thought. I mean, this is not the finished product. He's getting better. And Andy always said a quarterback doesn't really reach his potential in an offense until his fifth year. And this is his second year in this offense, third year in the league, but second year in this offense. So I think the Jalen Hurts we see in the next few years is going to be, look, statistically, I don't know how much better he can be. Like you look at the Super Bowl and it was like pretty much a perfect game other than the fumble. But as far as his passing stats, but you're looking at the consistency and, Andy's had some of the greatest, look, he's coached some great quarterbacks, so he knows. And the thought that Jalen's going to even get better is it's an exciting one. And it's got to be scary if you're in the NFC East and have to defend him.
Yeah, and it's not like I don't think we're ever going to see that big of a jump.
Right.
I don't know if there's that much room to jump anymore.
Right.
But yeah, I agree with you. He's going to keep getting better, and it's the same reason we thought he was going to get better from year one to year two. I don't know if we thought as a starter. I mean, I don't know if we thought it was going to be as monumental of a jump as it was. But man, if he can do incrementally get better, it's exciting. He's only 24.
It's crazy.
Yeah. On the flip side, we have to. I didn't put it in our budget, but I have to mention it. Carson Wentz got released. What do you think his future holds?
It's a great question. We're talking to our huddle producer, Mike Mulhern, who kind of outlined all the teams that still need quarterbacks. I personally don't think anyone's going to give him a starting job. I'm not sure he's cut out for to be a backup. I'm just not sure he has the mentality, because the guy you want as a backup's got to be a guy who can kind of just come in and manage the game, not make mistakes. It doesn't have to be Superman, doesn't have to be great, but that's not really Carson. He's either great or he's awful. And it's just like the opposite. Like, you look at his career, he hasn't had a lot of games that are like passer rating between like 80 and 100. They're all like off the charts or really, really bad. And the ratios kind of changed. But I just don't know if you can trust a guy like Carson as your two, just because the dynamic, he doesn't seem to really get along with quarterbacks. Maybe that's unfair, but it sure seems that way. Is he going to be the guy that's going to support the number one and have, go over photos with him? Look, I saw this on this play. What did you see? Maybe, but I don't know. And just the consistency that you want your backup to be a guy who can just come in and not make mistakes, doesn't have to throw 50-yard touchdowns, but can just manage the game and keep things going in the right direction. It's not Carson. So I don't know where he fits in. I do think he'll be in the league. I can't really picture the right situation. Maybe even Kansas City. I guess Henny retired. If anybody can kind of get his career back on track, it's Big Red. And that staff he's got there. Mike Kafka, who's his quarterback's coach now?
Well, Kafka's not there anymore.
Not Kafka, Matt Nagy is what I meant. Who's the Chiefs quarterback's coach? Yeah, I know Kafka's not there. I just said the wrong name.
Okay.
David Girardi. I don't know him, but I could see him being in a place where there's not going to be any competition. The number one is firmly ensconced, obviously. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you can go to a team with a young quarterback. That's not. We've seen that. That's not his strength. So I think like Kansas City was a team that came up as I was chatting with some people. I don't like no information. They're just kind of theorizing. That's what I think the structure he would need is to have a quarterback who clearly isn't losing their job. And he could be a backup. And, I think you could do worse than just Carson, the player, as a backup. But
yeah, it's the other parts that scare you.
Yeah. The fall from grace is amazing. Like it's shocking.
Yeah, it is. And I don't know if it's unprecedented. I mean, the Ben Simmons parallels are there. I think Ben was better for a longer time. I mean, Ben for 3 years was really for 4 years. It was an incredible player. Carson had a couple statistically really good years, but it was really 17. As far as
his peak was higher.
Yeah. They're different players, but obviously they're in different sports. They'd have to be different kind of players, but you know what I mean. But I don't know. In football, I just can't think of somebody who fell that far that fast. I think injuries played a part of it. I wonder if this will humble him. I mean, this will be 4 teams in 4 years.
He's not humbled yet.
Yeah, but I don't know. I don't know if it's in his nature to be humbled. And
it's a tricky thing because confidence is important, but
yeah. But I wouldn't want him near my young quarterback. And I'm not saying that to be mean. His history doesn't really indicate that would be a healthy situation.
Yeah, I'm with you. We didn't talk about any draft stuff. We'll get to that in the next pod. Today was so much news about free agency, but it's funny because the NFL Combine is like a lot of free agency masked by the draft event, and everyone thinks like you're going to the Combine, you must be really into all those prospects. And you're like, no, there's a lot of other stuff going on here.
And mainly because, not mainly, but I mean, it's a chance for all the agents and the GMs and the personnel executives to meet in person, and that seems to be when a lot of stuff gets done.
Yeah, it certainly does. You got anything else here?
No.
All right, let's wrap up. If you enjoy the Eagle Eye Podcast, please rate and subscribe wherever you get your pods. If you're watching on YouTube, please click the like button and subscribe there as well. That's it. We'll talk to you soon. For Rube, I'm Dave. This has been Eagle Eye, presented by Nissan.